Nobody in that glass tower knew that the woman mopping their floors every morning was the rightful owner of the very company they worked for. Not the security guards who waved her through without a glance. Not the executives who stepped over her cleaning cart like it was furniture. Not even the CEO, not yet. But by the end of this story, every single one of them would know her name, and they would never forget it again. Welcome to African Story House. If you're new here, kindly like, subscribe and comment. Before the sun rose over the city, Naomi Adebayo was already awake. By the time Jaden and Lila stumbled out of their room rubbing sleep from their eyes, breakfast was ready and their clothes were already ironed and hanging by the door. One day, Naomi told them both as she walked them to the bus stop, "Everything is going to get better. I promise you that." She meant it. She just didn't know how soon, or how impossibly, that promise would come true. 20 minutes later, Naomi disappeared into a small restroom at a gas station and emerged in a plain grey cleaning uniform, her name stitched crookedly above the pocket. She caught her own reflection for a moment, a woman who had once dreamed of boardrooms now dressed for mop buckets, and she let out a breath, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the towering glass building that dominated the skyline. Some people wear suits to hide their lies. Naomi wore a cleaning uniform to protect the only family she had left. Inside Crestpoint Capital, the world moved fast and loud and expensive. Executives strode past in tailored suits, phones pressed to their ears, coffee cups in hand, coffee cups that would, within the hour, be left carelessly on Naomi's freshly polished counters. Nobody looked at her twice. To most of them, she wasn't a person. She was simply part of the building, like the elevators or the potted plants in the lobby. Some were worse than indifferent. Bianca Rhodes, the CEO's polished and fiercely territorial executive assistant, seemed to take personal offense at Naomi's very existence. That morning, Bianca walked past the break room carrying a stack of files, and when she saw Naomi on her knees wiping up a spill, she didn't slow down. "Watch it," Bianca snapped, though Naomi hadn't moved an inch. Then, almost deliberately, Bianca let the top folder slip from her hand, sending paper scattering across the floor Naomi had just cleaned. "Oops," Bianca said flatly, not even looking back. "You'll get that, won't you? It is your job." A few nearby employees chuckled. Naomi said nothing. She simply knelt down, gathered the papers, and began wiping the floor again from the beginning. Her jaw was tight, her eyes stinging, but she did not let a single tear fall in that hallway. She had learned long ago that dignity was the one thing no one could clean off of her, no matter how hard they tried to humiliate her. What none of them noticed, what Bianca especially failed to notice, was the man standing quietly by the elevator bank, watching the entire scene unfold. Ethan Cole, CEO of Crestpoint Capital, 34 years old, calm-eyed, and famously difficult to read, had seen everything. He didn't say a word. He simply watched the way Naomi handled the humiliation, without anger, without self-pity, just quiet, steady grace, and something about it stayed with him long after he stepped into his office. Later that same day, Ethan witnessed something that would not leave his mind for the rest of the week. Naomi was cleaning near the executive lounge when she found a leather wallet wedged between two couch cushions. She opened it just enough to see the driver's license inside, and her eyes widened. It belonged to Richard Voss, one of the firm's most important clients, and it was thick with cash and platinum cards. Naomi didn't hesitate for even a second. She walked straight to the front desk security office and handed it over. "Someone left this in the lounge," she said simply. "I think it belongs to Mr. Voss." The security guard blinked at her, surprised. "You could have kept this. Nobody would have known." "I would have known," Naomi replied, and walked away to finish her rounds. Word of the found wallet spread through the office within hours, but the story that circulated credited building security for its swift recovery. Ethan, however, had already pulled the hallway camera footage. He watched, alone in his office, as the small screen showed Naomi finding the wallet and walking directly towards security without a moment's hesitation. He watched it twice. Who is this woman? He murmured to himself. That question would not leave him alone. 2 evenings later, Ethan stayed late reviewing quarterly reports when he walked past the break room and noticed the light still on. Naomi sat alone at the small table, an old, worn accounting textbook open in front of her, a pencil in her hand, working through practice problems during her 15-minute break like the answers still mattered to her. He stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. You understand financial statements? Naomi stuttered, quickly closing the book as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. I used to study them. Sorry, I'll be done with my break in a minute. That's not what I asked. Ethan stepped inside and gestured to the chair across from her. May I? She hesitated, glancing at the door as if this had to be some kind of mistake. Of course, sir. Ethan, he corrected gently. Not, sir. Not when we're talking like this. Slowly, cautiously, Naomi began to open up. She told him she had studied accounting at university, that she had dreamed of working in finance, of building something meaningful with numbers and strategy. Then, in a voice that grew quieter with every sentence, she told him about the highway accident that took both of her parents in a single night. She told him how relatives descended on the family home before the funeral had even been arranged, taking whatever they could carry, leaving Naomi, barely 20 years old, with 2 grieving children and no money left for tuition. I had to choose, she said, looking down at her hands. My dreams, or my brother and sister. It wasn't really a choice at all. You never went back. I couldn't. They needed me more than my dreams did. Ethan sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what she'd just shared so plainly, without asking for pity, without a hint of self-indulgence in her voice. That takes more strength than most people in this building will ever have to find, he finally said. Naomi gave a small, tired smile. It doesn't feel like strength. It just feels like Tuesday. Something shifted in Ethan that night. He began finding small reasons to talk to her, asking her opinion on the market during her break, mentioning a book he thought she might enjoy, remembering the names of her brother and sister without being told twice. It wasn't romantic, not at first. It was recognition. For the first time in years, someone in that building saw Naomi, truly saw her, and it terrified her exactly as much as it comforted her. Bianca noticed too. And Bianca did not like what she saw. Why does he keep talking to the cleaner? She hissed to a coworker one afternoon, watching Ethan and Naomi through the glass wall of the break room, laughing quietly about something neither of them would explain later. It's inappropriate. It's beneath him. Maybe he just likes talking to her, the coworker offered carelessly. Bianca's expression hardened into something colder. She is nothing. She mops floors. And he is the CEO of one of the largest firms on this coast. This is not how things work. The truth was simpler and uglier than professional concern. Bianca had loved Ethan quietly for 3 years, had organized her entire career around being indispensable to him, had imagined a future for the two of them that existed nowhere but inside her own mind. And now a cleaner, was threatening to unravel it, simply by being kind and being noticed. The jealousy festered for days, then weeks, twisting into something dangerous. It came to a head on a Thursday afternoon. Bianca waited until Naomi's cleaning cart was left unattended near the finance department, and she slipped an envelope of company cash beneath a folded stack of rags. 15 minutes later, she discovered the missing funds and reported it immediately to building security, her voice trembling with practiced outrage. I saw her near the safe earlier, Bianca told the security manager, her eyes wide with false concern. I didn't want to believe it, but someone should check her cart. Within the hour, Naomi was standing in a small office, surrounded by security personnel and a visibly shaken HR representative, as they searched through her cleaning supplies in front of nearly a dozen watching employees. Whispers rippled through the hallway outside. Some people didn't even bother to whisper. I knew something felt off about her. They should never have let cleaners have access to that floor. Poor Bianca, having to deal with theft on top of everything else. Naomi stood perfectly still through all of it, her hands folded, her spine straight, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her crumble. But inside, something in her chest felt like it was collapsing floor by floor. She thought of Jaden and Lila. She thought of losing this job, this income, everything she had built brick by exhausting brick to keep them safe. I didn't take anything, she said quietly, again and again. Please, check the cameras. I didn't take anything. And they did check the cameras. The footage was undeniable. It showed Bianca, alone in the hallway, slipping the envelope beneath Naomi's rags with practiced, deliberate hands. The room went completely silent as the security manager paused the footage and looked up. Bianca received only a quiet formal warning, no public consequence, no real accountability, because of her seniority and her closeness to leadership. She was allowed to walk out of that meeting with her head held high, throwing one final, venomous glance at Naomi on her way out. But everyone in that room had seen the truth with their own eyes, and Naomi walked out that night not with relief, but with a bruised, hollow feeling that no apology could fully repair. She had been humiliated in front of the entire office for something she never did, and the person responsible had walked away almost entirely unscathed. She didn't tell her siblings that night. She simply hugged them a little longer than usual, and let herself cry once they were finally asleep. If you're finding yourself invested in Naomi's story already, do us a favor, tap that like button right now, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Now, back to Naomi. Ethan heard about the incident within the hour, and he was furious, not loudly, not publicly, but with the kind of controlled anger that made people around him go very quiet. He pulled the footage himself. He watched Bianca's calculated movements frame by frame. And though he said nothing to Naomi about it directly that week, something inside him had changed permanently. He began to watch more carefully. He began to ask more questions. Not just about Bianca, about everything. It was during a routine review of an old corporate acquisition file, weeks later, that Ethan stumbled onto something that stopped him cold. The documents detailed Crestpoint's early partnership history with a smaller firm called Sterling Industries, one that had been folded into a larger holding company more than a decade earlier under unusually murky circumstances. And there, buried in a footnote referencing the original founder, was a name that made Ethan's chest tighten. Adebayo. He sat back in his chair, his pulse quickening. He pulled every related file he could access, shareholder records, transfer agreements, board meeting minutes from over a decade ago. What he found, piece by piece, made his stomach turn. Sterling Industries had originally been founded and majority-owned by a man named Daniel Adebayo, Naomi's father. After his sudden death in a highway accident, ownership had been fraudulently transferred through a series of falsified signatures and rushed paperwork to his business partner at the time, a man named Victor Hale, who now sat comfortably on several boards as a widely respected industry figure. Naomi hadn't been left with nothing by accident. She had been robbed. Ethan spent the following 2 weeks working quietly, carefully, almost obsessively, hiring an independent forensic auditor, cross-referencing old bank records, tracking down a retired notary whose signature had been used without consent. Every piece confirmed what the footnote had first suggested. The fraud was real, it was documented, and it was, remarkably, still within the legal window to challenge. He didn't tell Naomi any of it yet. Not because he wanted to hide it from her, but because he refused to give her false hope until he was certain he could deliver something real. Instead, he did something bold. Using his own capital and quietly assembling a small group of trusted investors, Ethan began acquiring controlling shares in the parent company that now oversaw what remained of Sterling Industries. It took patience, discretion, and no small amount of legal maneuvering, but piece by piece, share by share, he built the position he needed. On the morning everything would change, Naomi arrived at work exactly as she always did, tired, dutiful, unaware. She was told a board meeting would be held on the top floor that afternoon and that the room would need to be cleaned immediately afterward. It was, she assumed, just another Tuesday. She pushed her cart onto the top floor a little after 4, expecting an empty boardroom scattered with coffee cups and crumpled papers. Instead, she found the room full. A dozen board members sat around the long table. Victor Hale sat among them, visibly uneasy, glancing toward the door every few seconds as though sensing something was wrong. And at the head of the table stood Ethan. "Naomi," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. "Please, come in." She froze in the doorway, gripping the handle of her cart like it was the only solid thing left in the world. I was told to clean after the meeting. I can come back." "The meeting isn't over," Ethan said. "In fact, the most important part hasn't started yet. And it concerns you directly." Confused, hesitant, Naomi stepped inside as every eye in the room turned to study her, the cleaner, standing there in her uniform, utterly out of place among tailored suits and leather portfolios. Ethan nodded to the auditor beside him, who began distributing copies of a report around the table. 14 years ago, Ethan began, his voice steady and deliberate. Sterling Industries was founded by Daniel Adebayo. Following his death, ownership of that company was fraudulently transferred through falsified documentation to a business partner who then folded it into what eventually became part of this firm's holdings. Victor Hale's face drained of color. "This is absurd," he said, his voice cracking despite his effort to sound composed. "I don't know what you think you found, but we have signed affidavits from the original notary confirming his signature was used without his knowledge," Ethan continued calmly, cutting through the protest without raising his voice. "We have the falsified transfer documents themselves, along with forensic verification. Everything is here, Victor. Everything." The room fell into stunned, heavy silence. Naomi stood frozen, her cleaning cart forgotten beside her, tears already blurring her vision though she didn't yet fully understand what was happening. Ethan turned to face her directly, his expression softening. "Naomi, the company your father built was stolen from your family. And as of this morning, following an approved shareholder resolution, that theft has been formally reversed." He paused, letting the weight of his next words land fully. "You are the rightful majority shareholder of this company." The room erupted into murmurs. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth, her knees nearly giving out beneath her. That's not possible," she whispered. "I cleaned these floors." I can't, you can," Ethan said gently, stepping closer. "You always could. The only thing that ever changed is that now, everyone else finally knows it too." Naomi's tears came freely now, unstoppable, as board members who had never once acknowledged her existence rose from their seats, some in visible shock, others already recalculating how they had ever failed to see her. Victor Hale was quietly escorted from the room by legal counsel, his protests trailing weakly behind him, his reputation already unraveling with every passing second. News of the reversal spread through Crest Point like wildfire by the next morning. The woman everyone had overlooked, mocked, and accused was, in fact, the rightful owner of a company folded into their own. Whispers in the hallway shifted overnight from cruel to disbelieving to, in some cases, deeply ashamed. Bianca's downfall followed swiftly and without mercy, not because of jealousy alone, but because the renewed internal investigation into her conduct uncovered far more than the single planted envelope. Falsified expense reports. A pattern of quiet cruelty toward junior staff that had gone unreported out of fear. Manipulated records designed to make herself look indispensable while undermining colleagues behind their backs. She was terminated within the week, escorted out by security in the same hallway where she had once humiliated Naomi without a second thought. She left without a single person defending her. Naomi's transformation, by contrast, unfolded with quiet grace rather than spectacle. She didn't demand apologies from those who had mistreated her, though many gave them anyway, awkward and stumbling. She enrolled back in university within the month, finishing the accounting degree she had abandoned 4 years earlier, studying late into the night with the same quiet determination she had once used to survive. Jaden, watching his sister rebuild everything from the ashes of injustice, began speaking more openly about his own dream of becoming an engineer, no longer afraid to want something for himself. Lila, who used to cry more nights than she smiled, now laughed easily, freely, the way a 10-year-old should. And Naomi never forgot where she came from. One of her very first decisions as majority shareholder was to review the working conditions and wages of every cleaning and maintenance staff member across the company, raising pay, expanding benefits, and personally ensuring that no employee would ever again feel as invisible as she once had in that very building. Ethan asked her to dinner not long after, though carefully, respectfully, aware of everything she had just been through. Not as your investor, he clarified, standing a little awkwardly outside her small apartment, hands in his pockets like a nervous teenager despite his tailored suit. Not as anyone's boss. Just as a man who has admired the woman you've always been, long before any of this happened. Naomi smiled, the first fully unguarded smile she had allowed herself in years. I'd like that, she said simply. Months later, Naomi walked through the polished lobby of the headquarters she now partly owned, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor she used to scrub on her knees. Employees rushed past on either side of her, absorbed in their phones, their meetings, their deadlines, the same hurried indifference she remembered so well. Near the far wall, an older cleaner moved quietly with his cart, entirely unnoticed by the flow of people around him, exactly as she once had been. Naomi slowed her pace, then stopped completely. She walked over, and to the visible surprise of everyone nearby, she greeted him warmly, by name. Good morning, Mr. Alonso. How's your daughter's recovery going? The old man blinked at her, stunned that anyone, least of all the woman whose name was now on the building's letterhead, would remember such a detail about his life. She's doing much better, ma'am. Thank you for asking. I'm glad to hear it, Naomi said, meaning every word. You let me know if you or your family ever need anything. From across the lobby, Ethan watched the exchange with a quiet, familiar warmth spreading across his face. He walked over and fell into step beside her as she continued toward the elevators. You know, he said, most people forget where they came from the moment they don't have to remember anymore. Naomi glanced sideways at him, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. Then I suppose I'm not most people. No, Ethan said softly. You never were. They walked out together into the bright morning light, no longer CEO and cleaner, no longer invisible and overlooked, but simply two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, proof that sometimes the very person everyone chooses to ignore is the one who was extraordinary all along. The world often measures people by the work they do. But true greatness is revealed by the character they carry, even when no one is watching. If this story touched you, don't scroll away just yet. Hit that like button, subscribe to African Story House if you haven't already, and tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Stories like Naomi's deserve to be shared, so share this with someone who needs a reminder that their season is coming too. We'll see you in the next story.